let me introduce the rest of the panel. We'll ask Susan to be part of the panel as well. Starting, of course, with Di Curry, who is Chief Planner at Brisbane City Council. And we're really pleased to have her here. Many years experience of planning and planning practice, and was recently recognised as a member of the Order of Australia this year, last year, in fact, for services for town planning. So huge experience, and will give us hopefully some real insight into planning from a city council perspective, or Brisbane City Council in particular. Then we also have 3 early career researchers who were voted by their peers on our event on Tuesday. We have Dr. Abraham Lung, who's a career researcher here at Griffith University and the City's Research Institute. He does transport planning and particularly lots of research at the moment around micro-mobility. So he'll probably talk a little bit about that in relation to health. We have Dr. Ayodele Ayodele. Apologies, it's always tricky. I've been practicing your name, Ayodele. I'm not sure I got it right. He's currently an independent researcher. He's got a background in urban planning and geography, and particularly around urban design and housing affordability. And we have Dr. Anna McKinley from the University of the Sunshine Coast, who also has lots of experience in urban planning, and her recent research has been around housing size, and gave a very interesting talk about what housing size means in COVID times and why people have large houses in Australia, and whether they need them or not. So that's a really excellent panel, I think, given the things that Susan's talked about. I'll throw to Di first, so I'll just ask each of you to maybe reflect on Susan's presentation and your thoughts, and maybe Di, from the point of view of Brisbane City Council, the challenges that have existed and maybe new challenges that have come with COVID, but also back to the opportunities.
Thank you, Edward. Is my volume okay for everyone? I'll just check on that. Thanks, Paul. Paul, I am assuming that there will be squats the entire way through this discussion as well. I am watching. That's just bending at the knees. Well done, Sylvia. I can see you stretching. I'm impressed. Sorry for everybody. I have known Paul for many years. So I do tend to be a little cheeky with the people that I know well. So apologies for anybody who thinks I'm being terribly forward there.
I think it's great.
That's good. I like to see things like that.
I may sound very formal as a chief planner for Brisbane City, but I am utterly not. I am generally misbehaving, actually. I thought that was an absolutely fascinating discussion around the importance of health and well-being in our communities, and it's something I think about a lot. In addition to the work that I do for Brisbane City, I've spent the last, look, I don't know how many years now, 15 years, either in leadership positions in the Planning Institute of Australia, or the last 6 years as the Commonwealth Association of Planners President, looking at planning around the Commonwealth and representing 40,000 planners there. So I've done a lot of discussion around the future of cities. And in particular, I've been in some serious conversations, of course, for the last year around the future of our cities post-COVID. At that stage, everybody was thinking it was post-COVID, but I think certainly for a few years, it's going to be living with and thinking about what that means. But as you know, and as terrifying and as sad as that is, I think it's also really interesting in that it is embedding some of these changes more strongly. One of the other roles that I have is that I'm a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Task Force on Cities. And that group met weekly during the period of last year in terms of COVID and looked at the implications for cities. At that stage, Australia was not experiencing a lot of the severity that we've seen elsewhere. And our responses in terms of cities have been slightly different. So it's interesting watching what's happened then, as it has progressed. And as we've seen, sadly, more difficulties around the country. I know for me, it's been fascinating to think about the implications of this for Brisbane, and also to think about what are the trends that we might want to harness? What are the good things that we're seeing that we might want to really make sure we're building into the planning and operation of our cities? So, for example, the fact that everybody got out last year and walked more or rode their bikes or played in parks, I think is something we should be capitalising on immediately. Certainly, you know, we have seen and actually monitored the increase in people's activity levels and the use of our parks. We've seen dramatic changes in people biking. We've seen dramatic changes in the use of e-bikes and e-scooters as well, both of which also have significant implications, obviously, from pollution perspectives and traffic congestion. So I've been thinking about some of these trends and what it means for cities generally. The other one that I'd really like to capture just while we're talking anecdotal discussions though, is that connection that people have had to their neighbours, to their families and to their direct street environments. Those afternoon walks, as it was in my case, where every day you would see people out and around connecting back into their families and into their neighbourhoods. In my community, there was a thing about putting teddy bears in housing windows, which I just thought was so gorgeous. I didn't understand it because I don't have children, so I wasn't part of the networks. And I was wandering the streets sort of thinking, what is going on? Until I then asked questions and found out it was an actual thing to connect children. And I think these other forms of connection are critical at a time when we are standing physically back from one another. So some of the changes and trends that I'm thinking through for the future of our cities are a step change and certainly a structural change in our retail environments. This has brought forward the online activity in retail by at least 10 years from most of the research that I can see. What we're seeing there is then a corresponding decrease in the footprint of many stores, and that's equally having a structural change then on CBD shopping centres and all sorts of retail environments. It equally has a structural change on our logistics and warehousing processing plants. Trucks, for example, have changed away from all being about B doubles coming in into lots of smaller trucks delivering 24/7 around our cities. That has an impact back on warehousing need. That has an impact back on the value of industrial land. That has an impact back onto city council rates. So all of those things are intertwined in a really interesting way. And they all have implications for the future of our planning. We've also seen, as we talked about earlier, that again, I think a structural change in our workforces into working from home. I don't believe for a moment that the vast majority of people who have done that will return to 5 days a week in the office. I think the flexibility that this has brought and the connection into family environments is something that employers of choice will want to continue. I don't think it should be 5 days a week from home, and I'm not recommending that. I just think there'll be that 1 or 2 day activity level. We're certainly seeing that now in terms of demands for changing building requirements in housing and in large unit complexes. We're also, of course, then seeing those implications through into commercial leasing spaces. What will be the future of the office environment? I was in a major PCA discussion the other day that basically said it's too soon to predict. We know there will be changes, and there's certainly design changes already coming in commercial leasing environments. I wonder at times whether what we've learnt in the last year about being able to smooth the curve in terms of traffic management, so by smoothing and changing our transport patterns because of those changes of working from home, does that mean there's a different way to sweat our other expensive infrastructure assets, such as schools? Our entire transport system is built around kids going to school at a certain time and being picked up at another time. That means we don't use those very expensive pieces of infrastructure for vast quantities of the day. Are there 2 shifts of schools that could be occurring as a different way to sweat our assets better, but also to smooth some of those transport impacts? Don't know, just something I'm playing with. Another key trend that I'm really conscious of is the digital divide. We saw that so strongly last year, where people needed to either work from home or school their children from home. If we don't have really strong ability for digital connection, what does that mean from a societal connection perspective and from children not being able to be educated? So that I think digital infrastructure is now becoming, or has now become, just as critical to us as each of the other standard pieces of infrastructure. And then the other, I mean, industry as an activity is changing. We're seeing onshoring instead of offshoring as a changing thing. We're certainly seeing changing natures and cleaner industries coming through. We're certainly doing a review of our industrial strategy as a city at the moment to acknowledge that. And then the last one I just wanted to flag is the changes in our creative economies. The incredible importance of art and culture to our cities and our communities, and the beating that particular community has taken as a result of COVID. How do we re-stimulate that? And how do we make sure that we're building that into our future cities in a much more resilient fashion? Sorry, I've probably gone way over time there.
Not a problem at all. Fascinating, really interesting. I was just madly scribbling notes. So no, really interesting. Thanks, Di.